This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony, air quotes, Nippy, Ames.
And this is A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real cult stories told directly by the people who lived through them.
Because we want you to learn a few things we've had to learn the hard way.
Like, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you're already prime recruitment material.
You might even already be in a cult.
Oops. You better keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Season 6 of A Little Bit Culty.
Welcome back to A Little Bit Culty, everyone. Today we are diving into the dark side of Nickelodeon.
Sometimes predators hide in plain sight, like on the set of your kids' favorite TV shows.
Be warned that this episode explores the topic of child abuse, so please listen with care.
Delving into the dark heart of the toxic and ultimately tragic culture on the set of some of the most popular late 90s to early 2000s Nickelodeon kids shows. The whole awful mess has recently been brought to light in the investigation discovery docuseries Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV.
It turns out that some of the same shows that launched the careers of megastars like Ariana Grande, Amanda Bynes, and Kenan Thompson also plunged some young actors into a lifetime of PTSD.
Inspired by an expose originally reported by Business Insider journalist Kate Taylor, Quiet on Set reveals the heartbreaking ease with which a child predator named Brian Peck groomed and sexually abused at least one, that we know of, young Nickelodeon cast member and got away with it. Well, he didn't get away with it, but you'll see.
Despite some astonishingly overt, problematic behavior, it went unaddressed for years. And incredibly, Brian Peck wasn't even the only pedophile on that set.
The series also uncovers an on-set environment teeming with gender and racial discrimination, sexual harassment, coercion, allegedly perpetrated by Golden Boy showrunner Dan Schneider.
This all took place under the noses of parents and on the watch of network executives intent on promoting Schneider, all the while counting their cash.
Kate Taylor, who is also the executive producer of Quiet on Set, has worked as features writer for Business Insider for over 8 years, exposing the nasty underbelly of epically toxic workplaces. We're looking at you, Brandy Melville, Subway, and the set of America's Next Top Model.
Kate joins us today to discuss the Nickelodeon scandal, the impact of the series, and the fraught path forward for Hollywood and child actors.
How does something like this happen, and how do we make damn sure it never happens again? How do we do more than just recover from this collective horror to make real, lasting change happen?
Much to discuss. Here's our chat about Quiet on Set with journalist Kate Taylor.
Hey, Kate, welcome to A Little Bit Culty.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm sure your life is just blowing up since you've exposed this whole shit show of a scandal. How are you doing, first of all, before we get into it all?
It's been a wild time of the last few weeks. I feel like I've been living with this kind of Nickelodeon, Dan Schneider, weird reporting for 2 years now. And it's just like been really an out-of-body experience, seeing so much of what I've been reporting on and hearing about just reach such a wide audience. So it's been really gratifying to see so many people respond to it, but also really, really surreal.
I bet. It's intense. I mean, our audience certainly, even though it's not like a cult per se, reached out to us for a number of different reasons, like, as they do, got to watch this docuseries. Yeah. And we're like, okay, it's on the list. And as soon as we started watching, we were like, holy shit.
Well, our audience,
so mad.
Our audience is educated to coercion. So when they see coercive stuff, they kind of let us know. And then we go in with our acumen, if you will, and see it as well.
How did you first hear about this. Like, what tell us about your journey with this fiasco.
In 2022, I kind of was pitching some stuff to my editor. And at that point, there was already kind of these online rumors about Dan Schneider where people were like, oh, like, what's up with the feet on these shows? Like, what's up with kind of these weird scenes? And I went to my editor and I was like, this is a situation maybe where there's smoke, there's fire, or maybe this guy just has the worst reputation for no reason. And like, he should be vindicated. And like, I should report on this and just be like, what's rumors? What's reality? So I went from there and reached out to a ton of people who had worked on Nickelodeon shows as either child actors or as members of the crew or as writers. And pretty quickly, it became clear that there were certain patterns of toxic behavior that, especially for the crew and writers, people who were adults at the time, were able to perceive and for the first time talk about for a lot of them.
So what are the first questions? How do you approach something like this? How do you vet it? You have rumor, you have maybe conjecture, but there's certain things that you feel are going on. How do you do it, and what's the sensitivity that maybe you already had or had to develop over the course of inquiries?
I think it was really, especially for my original article, it was a real balance of kind of looking and saying, okay, while I am talking to some people who've had really negative experiences with this person or with Nickelodeon, I'm also talking to former child actors who have nothing but good things to say about Nickelodeon and Dan Schneider. So kind of going in and trying to be like, both of these things can be true. And in situations with coercion, usually are true. There are people who have horrible experiences and people who have great experiences. And often those people who have had positive experiences are used to negate other people's negative experiences.
Right. Some people targeted, some people not.
Yeah. So I think that was something that was a little bit of a learning on my first investigation, my first article.
Can you give sort of a summary of who these key players are in the story?
Yeah. So when I started reporting on Nickelodeon Dan Schneider, it was essentially an investigation into a certain era at Nickelodeon where you have Dan Schneider as the show creator. And he created some of these shows that were massive hits for Nickelodeon in the late 90s, early 2000s. So he was a head writer on all that when it originally started. But he really kind of started building this empire of shows once he was creating them themselves. So he has The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, iCarly, Victorious, Zoe 101. And all of these shows were really important and successful for Nickelodeon at the time. And all of them were kind of aimed at preteen audience. There's a little bit of variety. Some are for a little bit older, some are a little younger, but it's a pretty preteen audience. And this is also the first time Disney Channel and Nickelodeon are aiming at that audience in a really, really big way. So Dan Schneider becomes really an important player at Nickelodeon in kind of building this empire of shows and kind of continuing to find really talented child actors who go on to become incredibly successful, whether that is Amanda Bynes, who was first on All That and then on The Amanda Show. Ariana Grande is a great example, who is on Victorious, now is one of the most famous pop stars in the world. So Dan Schneider has a great talent for spotting young talent. But as you talk to more people, some people are uncomfortable with scenes in the shows that they now feel are pretty sexualized. And then you also talk to people who worked behind the scenes, and they kind of describe Dan Schneider as essentially a toxic, abusive boss in the workplace.
Like when you started, you knew one thing. By the end, you knew so much more. What's that journey been like for you?
The journey from starting reporting to writing my investigation to the documentary coming out has been really wild, where I think that it has gone from something where it becomes looking into one person to trying to kind of look at a wider system where it's not just one person was failing child actors. It was several people were either exploiting child actors, sexually abusing child actors, or just not supporting child actors and creating an environment where they could be protected as well as they should be.
So knowing this, what actions do you think can be taken by networks to protect actors? And also for parents whose children want to get into acting?
Something that some of the participants in the documentary have talked about is how helpful it would be to have a sort of liaison. And different people have talked to me and kind of described this as different roles. Basically, someone who is worked with the parents on set to just advocate for these kids. Something that I think gets a bit muddled in child stardom is that many people around children are incentivized to just keep this kid working. Families become financially dependent on a kid, and it becomes really, really difficult for them to speak up and push back. And I think having someone who works directly with these families to explain the financial realities of the situation, whose sole job is to kind of protect these kids, that would be a big step forward. Another thing that we've talked about is just not allowing child predators to work in the industry.
Yes. Shocking.
Which I think is something that is not just networks. Like, we've heard Nickelodeon has said they've made changes since this time when they had actual child predators working here. They've increased background checks. But yeah, I mean, the national legislation around this, it is essentially that a convicted sex offender can work with young children as long as there is a parent or guardian on set, which, as we've seen in this, does not always fix this problem.
These predators are very skilled at separating families. We've done a lot of interviews where a child has been in a seemingly safe environment. We've done the Boy Scouts, we've done religion, we've done, obviously Nickelodeon. And if you're a child predator and there's a volume of kids there, that seems to be a place that they're going to go. And it seems to me that you need to anticipate that this is where the predators are going to go. Hearing Drake Bell's story was, appalling to see how this guy just doubled down to get what he wanted in front of the parents. So that's a hard thing to combat because parents, it seemed like Drake and his dad had a pretty healthy relationship and it was still, vulnerable to this guy's
manipulation.
Well, skills, predatory skills, really. You have to look at that's what they have. Right?
Yeah. Drake is a great example of his dad did everything right. He went kind of to production and said, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this. And he was just dismissed. So I think that's something that a lot of people, and people continue to say this watching Quiet on Set, like, where were the parents? And Drake's dad did everything a parent was supposed to do. If there were people in this situation who are kind of like, okay, here are the warning signs for grooming. If every time a child actor is working on these shows, kind of they were informed of these warning signs, I think that could go a long way because, I mean, when you have someone who's good at manipulation, it is easy. And I think for parents, for coworkers, you want to see someone and be like, this is someone who just has genuine interest in my son, in helping them mature and being a mentor. But when you kind of are told of these signs and say, hey, like, wow, this can seem like someone who's a nice person, these are also just typical hallmarks of grooming, it kind of will allow the red flags to become more apparent at times.
Also, like, it was such a clear thing for us to see how Peck dangled, career opportunities. Where is he now, by the way? Is he like in hiding, I'm hoping? Or like, what, is he still out and about? What?
He's not in prison or anything anymore. He is very difficult to get a hold of because while he continued to work after he was imprisoned for sexual abuse, he now is keeping a pretty low profile. The internet makes it so much easier for people to look up people who have been convicted of these things.
That's a great point. The internet makes it much easier to do some preliminary vetting, which brings up the question of the people who wrote letters of support for Peck. I've seen that some people have retracted their support. Has anyone doubled down that Peck is innocent?
We haven't had people publicly doubling down, but I mean, we reached out to a number of big names who wrote letters of support, and not all of them have responded. James Marsden, for example, still hasn't kind of released a statement around this saying any further context around his writing a letter of support for Brian Peck. These letter writers met Peck themselves when they were teenagers. I believe James Marsden met Brian Peck very, very early on in his career when he was still like an older teen. These are people who see Brian Peck as someone who was someone they met when they were very young and vulnerable. And I think it can be difficult to untangle those feelings of, oh, this was someone who was there for me when I was young versus this is someone who is preying on someone else when they were young.
And we may never know. I believe after this documentary, more people will come forward about Peck. This is not just Drake. He kicked the door down for that truth to be told.
Yeah, we will see. We will see if more people come forward. He has only been convicted of child sex abuse as it relates to Drake, or not convicted. He pleaded no contest to child sex abuse as it was related to Drake, but there haven't been any other public allegations so far. But I mean, often in these cases, you do see more people coming forward, either things related to Brian Peck or related to their own experiences as child actors with other predators in the industry.
Yeah.
This podcast wouldn't happen without our amazing, supportive, generous patrons. Are you with us? Come find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/a-little-bit-culty for bonus episodes, exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with our fan favorites from our past episodes. It's a lot of fun over there, people.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
You've heard from our sponsors. Now let's get back to A Little Bit Culty, shall we? We were both so shocked that he only got 16 months for such horrendous acts of sex
And that
abuse.
it wasn't headlined more.
Yeah, that was something that I think Drake really struggled with at the time, where he kind of was saying, why wasn't TMZ writing about this? Why wasn't this making major news?
Have you looked into that?
I think it's difficult to look into. We have no clear answers as to whether this was a cover up or this was just pre-internet. So TMZ was not as kind of like chasing down these leads in the way it might be now. I think that it's difficult to say if these were things that were purposeful or if it was just a different time. But yeah, I think how we think about child predators in the children's entertainment industry has shifted, because it was not something that was ever seen as like normal, but we had these cases that were kind of swept under the rug. We're not receiving a ton of mainstream press when arrests were made at the time. And I do genuinely think that that would not happen today.
I agree. I know you said your DMs were pretty full. Have other people reached out to you with their story since, without naming names, of course?
People have reached out, and something that's been really depressing is that it's not just people in children's entertainment. I've had so many people across so many different fields saying, we have a quiet on set in our industry as well, where it's not just kind of Nickelodeon or not just Disney. It is across all of these different industries that involve children. There are so many different parents, kind of people who grew up in those, saying, oh, can you look into this? Can you look into this? So yeah, it's been an overwhelming response where it can be difficult thinking, okay, this is not a matter of a couple of bad apples. This is something where there are predators like this in many different fields that involve children.
Yeah. We've certainly seen that a lot on our podcast, especially in sports. How do you take care of yourself in this? Because it's a lot. It's so traumatic.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where I try when I am done reporting for the day to truly like log off, be offline. And if I'm reading books, I tend towards things that are very like kind of trash novels, very like low stress TV shows, a lot of Great British Bake Off vibes. Because it's something where there's so many documentaries that I think there have a lot of commonalities and raise similar concerns to this. But off the clock, I am not watching those as much as maybe I could be.
And how about Nickelodeon? Have you heard from them? Any of the executives?
Yeah, I mean, I reached out to Nickelodeon for my original article. The producers, the directors of the documentary reached out to them. And I think that their pretty consistent statement through this has been like, this was something that happened in the past, but things are better now. Nickelodeon kind of cut ties with Dan Schneider in 2018. And yeah, very reasonable, both in terms of PR and in terms of just wanting to feel like, okay, our current executives were not here when there were multiple child predators on set of these shows. So I think that there has been some changes made. But I think that children's entertainment in general, like, it's not like things are 100% fixed today. I think that there's a lot of new ways, too, that children kind of can be put in harm's way or exploited. Something that the directors of Quiet on Set and I've talked about is like child influencers. There's even less regulation there than you would find on any network show now.
Wow. I don't know if you probably definitely do not know this, but we do have a film and television background ourselves. And for a moment, which I'm going to tell you about later, but for a moment, our son dabbled when he's a couple roles, like a 3, 5, 7. And we never pushed it on him. It was just like, and I was very clear after seeing certain friends go through just other fucked up things about being child actors, like what it does for entitlement and feeling so special and the money. I was just like, I don't really want this for him, but he had an opportunity. We took it, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, we were on set of Babysitter's Club. He had a recurring role in the Babysitter's Club. And Nippy and I were just talking about, like, obviously, but one of us was there the whole time.
Yeah.
This is after NXIVM, okay? I never was considering, like, I needed to protect him from predators. I was like, I just need to make sure he knows what he's doing, that he goes pee in between takes, and eats something and, like, does his homework. And Nippy said he was. And I was like, I couldn't believe that I hadn't, even after going through what we'd gone through, I wasn't like on alert for sexual abuse. Do you know what I mean?
I was just on alert for someone giving him too much attention inappropriately. I mean, I'm also the kind of guy who doesn't want to sit with his back to the door in a restaurant. And And I actually consider what would happen if someone came in a gun and how I'd protect my family. So that's where I go.
You're on it. You're always, which is like kind of what you
Yeah.
have to do in these situations, which is really sad. Like, I think that so many, even Drake, who I've talked to about this, he's like, if my son wanted to be a child actor, like, I wouldn't want to say no. Like, there were amazing things, like the creative outlet of being able to act as a kid, like, and being able to perform and being able to kind of be in the music industry. Like, he's like, I really loved a lot of those things, and I wouldn't want to tell my son he could never do that. But it is a really, really difficult environment.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What would you say? You don't have kids, right?
I don't have kids at this point, but I don't know. I mean, I think that for me, I would hope that I would be able to find a situation where I don't know what I would do. There's so many factors where, like, I've talked to other former child actors who had been like, oh, it was an okay experience for me because of X reason. Like, oh, it was okay for me because I was on a show that was publicly funded, like a PBS show, and that was a different environment than this. Or like, I was okay because my parents had worked in the industry, so they knew what to look out for. I don't think that there's like a one size fits all solution, but I do think, like, we don't allow child labor in other industries. Like, what makes entertainment so different?
That's a
really good point.
That's a very good point.
Well, I can answer that probably. Money.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Money.
exactly. Yeah. Which is difficult to grapple with, where it's like, okay, then where does that leave us? So I think there's no one like black and white solution, but I think that it's helpful for everyone who's involved to continue grappling with these things and thinking about them.
Yeah, it's also organic too. I mean, I don't know if it's proprietary to Hollywood, but it seems like that's where a lot of this rot is. I'm not saying that if it wasn't in a different state, it wouldn't exist there. But to your point, when you were talking about social influencers, like, there's always going to be something that's going to allow this to permeate. And there needs to be a constant education about really wherever there's kids, and a lot of kids expect predators to show up.
Yeah. I think that some people, like good people who worked in children's entertainment, I think it's easy to be a little in denial where you're saying, well, like, I would never think about kids that way. Like, that's so horrifying. Like,
well, that's
I want
what allows
to
them to
believe
get
that
away
these
with
people,
it.
I know, because it's people want to believe that other people are decent people like they are.
To the point of, like, Pat called all these supporters, instead of condemning the letters of support, you might want to look at how effective he is in getting that support. Because one of the things with these predators, and one of the things in our situation with Keith Raniere, is people are like, how? And they're quick to dismiss. Well, how is the great thing to look at, because a lot of intelligent people don't see it. And there's a reason they don't see it, because these guys are very, very good. And Drake's dad seemed really on it, as on it as I think I would have been. Like, this doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem right. And still, he was able to do it in their face. So I think lending more credibility to how good these people are doing what they're doing ought to be the focus, as opposed to condemning the people that fell for it. Wouldn't you say?
I think that for the average person watching the documentary, that is really probably the most helpful perspective, because when you say, like, oh, I would never do that, I would never write a letter of support for someone like that, you become blind to the ways that you might be manipulated to doing something like that. It's like saying, like, oh, I would never fall for like a scam. It makes scammers more powerful. But on the other hand, I also understand why for the victim, someone like Drake,
yeah, for sure,
seeing these names pop up, that's like feels like such a personal, deep, deep pain and new thing to grapple with.
I would be
Betrayal.
pissed off, and I would let every single one of them know it.
We've had people stay loyal to Keith Raniere for years, and eventually they call us, and it's, it's one by one, and it feels very vindicating, but also healing and cathartic. And I hope that he has that same experience eventually, and I'm sure he will. You produced Quiet on Set as well, correct?
Yes, I was one of the executive producers on Quiet on Set, which was really an eye-opening experience for me because I'd never been involved in a documentary in that way before.
Now that it's done and we're at this stage, would you change anything now that you know what you know?
It's one of those things where you can revisit a million decisions in your mind, which I often do after every story I write publishes. And I think for a documentary, there's even more decisions and more things to weigh. I think that all I can do is kind of be really proud of what we made and kind of the product we were able to put out and the response it's been able to receive. And I think I would probably drive myself crazy if I was thinking about anything that I would change. It's such a communal experience. It takes so many people kind of being willing to be vulnerable to make something like this. And I think that all the participants had to be really willing to kind of be vulnerable, to share their stories. And then all of the people behind the scenes, the directors, Mary and Emma, were both like incredibly just talented and hardworking and having this come together. And then everyone from the people who are editing it, everyone who's shooting it on the day on the set, like it truly takes a village. It's really, really incredible to see how these things come together.
And how long was it from start to finish?
My article published at the end of the summer in 2022, and we began working on the documentary pretty soon after that.
Just curious if when you started to see the certain patterns with Dan, did the term cult ever come up in your discussions or in your writing?
That's really interesting. It was more coercion. I have another documentary that I've now worked with in Brandy Melville, a documentary on that, which the cult came up a lot when I was reporting that story about this really kind of exploitative teen retailer. For Nickelodeon, I think that the idea of cult came up a bit, but it was almost less a cult following for Dan, because even though he had a lot of employees who followed him from show to show, I think that a lot of them went in with relatively nuanced understandings, and kind of like, it wasn't that everyone who worked with him was like, oh, this person is perfect. So I think that it was a little bit more kind of coercion, less cult, to me at least.
Yeah.
All cults have coercion, so
yeah.
Yeah.
For more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, and at most bookstores. If you want to see that story in streaming form, watch both seasons of The Vow on HBO.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Growing your business can mean big-time logistical questions, like how are we going to keep up with all these local deliveries? Let Uber Direct offer you a helping hand. With Uber Direct, you take orders on your website, app, or by phone. Then drivers who are part of Uber's courier network pick them up from your store and deliver them to your customer's doorstep. Sounds simple, right? Uber Direct helps you give your customers what they want when they want it. Offer them delivery options in under 2 hours, on the same day, or scheduled up to 30 days in advance. Plus, share real-time tracking and ETAs by text. You can keep growing your business at a price that works for you. Never pay commission or hidden charges. Just pay a fixed fee per delivery. Delivery just got better with Uber Direct. Learn more at uberdirect.com.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one.
We took a couple of notes because whenever we watch something, we always write down the similarities just to kind of, reference it for our listeners. There were dynamics that were at play, it specifically regards to the hierarchy.
Mhm.
And people said like he owned my time and everyone being on eggshells and trying to please him, specifically for knowing that they could be fired at a moment's notice. Like living in that
Yeah.
fear state is very typical. And that the person at the top sets the tone for that. And that's the real
Tyrannical.
problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
tyrannical.
I think that these people, a lot of them kind of were like, oh, this doesn't feel like it has the hallmarks of a cult to me. This feels like it has just as a bad job.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it is a job where people are expected to kind of be on call 24/7 if that's what Dan wants. They're expected to kind of please Dan above everything else. And again, not everyone had these exact same experiences, but
Right.
something I heard pretty consistently from people who worked with him across the board was that kind of what he wanted, what he thought was funny, what he thought was right trumped everyone else, what they wanted day to day, creatively, in general.
Right. You don't even have to call it a cult. It's just a not healthy environment to
Yeah.
live
Right.
in.
The closer you get to the epicenter of it is where I think more coercion happens if you're targeted that way, similar to the situation we were in. You were targeted. I wasn't.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting again because it's not that everyone had exactly the same experiences, but again, like you guys said, kind of having the like both positive and negative and never knowing what you were going to get is part of what makes people like that really powerful.
Once someone has a dependency, whether it be healthcare, whether it be incentives and all that stuff,
Or your income.
and you have a family and you have a job and you have all that stuff, getting up and leaving, with 2 kids and a mortgage and all that stuff isn't easy. So I think you're at the whim of someone, who knows that and knows that, hey, I can ask this guy X, Y, Z. He's not going to not do what I'm going to ask him because he's totally dependent on me. And then, if I'm aware of that, I can use that and abuse that. Similar atmosphere to here. It's like if these kids want to be child stars, if they want to have careers after that, they know that I'm in control of that disproportionately to maybe even what their talent is. So if they can use that or threaten them to be quiet or something like that, they're going to do it because there's a lot of money and a lot of jobs and a lot of people dependent on that.
And it's quiet on set.
Yeah. So I think building awareness to it is the first step.
I think that for children, like you do not have kind of the understanding of workplace norms that you might have later on in your career also. So you kind of become uniquely vulnerable. And if there's something you don't like there are so many people whose livelihoods depend on these shows.
Yeah.
Like you could be putting dozens of people's livelihoods at stake. And that is a lot of pressure to be willing to do when you're a teenager.
Or a kid.
Oh, God, I hadn't thought of that particular angle. Wow.
Also, your parents.
Yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon for these parents to kind of give up, one of them at least, to give up a job to be there supporting their kid, to be on set. So that is a situation where your parent might have gone into debt to get you into this situation. And
Right.
that's not something you can just walk away from and have it be like something that rolls off your back super easily.
True. So many things keeping it all in place. Has there been any backlash for you or for any of the actors?
To me, like, I think that any project, like, we should be open to receiving criticism.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
I always am willing to listen to that.
that's healthy.
And I think that that's kind of like the best way to approach it. I'm proud of that we've been able to reach all these people, but yeah, I'm also definitely willing to listen to criticism.
Did you have people on set to help support people like Drake when they were sharing their stories?
I wasn't on set for all of the interviews being done. You never want to put someone into a position where they're feeling re-traumatized. And I think that that's hard to do as a journalist in general, to kind of say, hey, can you talk about one of the worst things that's happened in your life? And we want to share this with the world. I think that just inherently, that's a really, really vulnerable position. I know talking with Drake, he kind of was like, I felt like you did this in the best way possible. I felt really comfortable. But yeah, I think that it's going to be a really difficult needle to thread no matter what. I always worry about that. And that's not specific to Nickelodeon. That's kind of any story. It's hard.
We feel the same way as interviewing people on a little bit culty with their trauma. And we've learned a lot. We've made mistakes. I mean, what I want to do is send them on a week trip with, massages and therapy and like,
Exactly.
The subjects, and myself included, Sarah included, we had our boundaries crossed inadvertently in a lot of ways. And reestablishing those while on camera with people who want our story, sometimes it would just happen in real time where I just go, boop, I'm out. Or I'd go hide behind the camera and I'd just talk to them. I'm like, hey, I was like, I'm not doing this right now.
And for the record, not with the vow. The vow was always a very positive experience for us. But there were some interviews where people were like, so why do people join cults? You know, like, do you really want to know?
Even with people you trust, you go, oh, this is a territory. And I would just go, hey, I think this is something that I need to just kind of like figure out for myself. Like they weren't pushy. I didn't know. I mean, I was going through it and I didn't know what it was until it was crossed. And I was like, that feeling doesn't feel right. I gotta look at this, and I just go hide.
It's so difficult as a journalist to be like, hey, like I need to ask these follow-up questions. If you don't feel comfortable answering them, you don't have to. But like, I also don't want to not ask something and then have a story out there and you being like, oh, you misinterpreted my words, or like, oh, that wasn't the full story. So it's hard to balance kind of being like, I want to ask these questions. I want to allow my reporting to take me wherever it goes, while being like, you don't have to answer this if this is going to kind of re-traumatize you and put you in a hard situation. I just never want someone I'm interviewing to feel like, oh, Kate didn't tell my full story because she didn't keep following up, basically.
Right. That's a responsible
You're never
going to
get it right.
Yeah. You could
it's
try.
hard.
Right.
It's really, really hard. And I think that it's a difficult needle to thread. No project it should be exempt from criticism, but I think that it's something that in everything I work on, I want to be aware of.
Totally. I really respect that stance, that you could be proud of your project, accept criticism, accept that some people, might have a problem with it or a particular element of it. We personally think it's just a really important story that needs to be told. And my acting career started in the late 90s on YTV, which is the Canadian Nickelodeon. And a lot of those series ended up on Nickelodeon.
Oh, wow.
So I did like Are You Afraid of the Dark and Big Wolf on Campus and Student Bodies. This is like 1998 to 2001, 2002-ish. And those shows were like the Canadian equivalent of Nickelodeon. And I had like the opportunities to go down to LA and like do LA. And for a number of reasons I didn't. And one of them was that I went down with my girlfriend, Victoria Sanchez, and we were in our early 20s and we like dropped off our headshots at Miramax to like maybe meet Harvey Weinstein,
Yeah.
which we didn't. And like at Sky Bar, where some guy was like telling us that he could cast us in his next movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, but we have to go learn about it upstairs in his hotel room, which of course, we didn't do. But I was also self-aware enough to know that I wasn't strong enough to be in Hollywood. I felt that and somehow avoided it. But then of course, 5 years later, I ended up in Nexium. But
it's so hard. Yeah. It's so hard. And like, I think that I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because something that stood out from a lot of these former child actors with me, both ones who have described having negative experiences and ones who said my experience tended to be pretty positive, was that they felt like they were treated as and felt like they were adults from a very young age, where from like 14, they kind of thought, oh, I'm all grown up. Like, it's not a problem for me to kind of be having this older person flirting with me, or having this older person kind of spend all this alone time with me, because I am functionally an adult already, which I think for a lot of them looking back, they're like, oh my gosh, like now I'm a 14-year-old child, like that is a child. But I think at the time, working this environment, a lot of them felt like fully adults from a very, very young age.
Mm-hmm. I think that is one of the inherent problemes with child actors is and also all of the attention.
I knew at 14 I was dumb.
Yeah.
I was fully aware at 14, 15, I am a dumb 14, 15-year-old kid.
If you have a I need to be special complex, which is like part of my journey with Nexium, being on set is like totally panders to that. You have everybody doing your makeup, your touches, your wardrobe. Do you need anything? Can I get you a bottle of water? Are you okay? Like, you're basically a princess or a prince, and that's like, that in and of itself is not good for children. Just breeds this entitlement.
It's so hard to know like the solution, because so much of this is just the total environment for any like 14-year-old when you're the center of this on-set universe. It's like, oh, wow, like I am an adult. I'm a breadwinner.
Exactly. Is there anything that we didn't ask you that you feel like you want to share with our audience?
I don't think so. I mean, for anyone who's listening to this and hasn't watched the docuseries yet, I would say 5 episodes. They're all streaming on Max. If anyone wants to read my initial investigation on top of that. That's on Business Insider from 2022. It's a lot of kind of similar reporting that we have for this, but there's some things that I dwell on a bit more, especially I think we had a lot in the documentary kind of on the earlier days at Nickelodeon. I mean, especially Drake being involved, there was a lot that we focused on with his specific experience. And my article has a little bit more on kind of Dan Schneider's later years at Nickelodeon. But yeah, if anyone kind of is listening to this and haven't watched and read, that's kind of how you can learn more.
And I would echo that and say anyone with children, definitely give it a look. You know, these are the same kind of personalities, no matter, not just at Nickelodeon. They're maybe at your schools, maybe at your YMCAs. I don't know, maybe you're coaching, but, you know, get sensitive to that, because I think your documentary does a really good job of like what these predators look and sound like. They're very charming and they're very charismatic, and they if you don't think you can be fooled, I think that makes you susceptible. So for that reason alone, I would watch it.
So what did you think of Dan Schneider's apology?
The thing that stood out to me most about Dan Schneider's apology was what Giovanni Samuels said in our 5th episode, was that basically before he released the apology, before the documentary even came out, Dan Schneider reached out to Gio and said, like, you know what a great person I am. Could you kind of like come out in support of me? And that to me really speaks to the fact that Gio was very involved in this. Like, her voice is in the documentary. She talks about both the positive experiences that she had, but also the experiences of discrimination she faced. And I think that that to me is almost more significant than anything I could interpret on Dan Schneider's documentary, and how Dan has interpreted criticism to him and how he sees people as supporting him or not supporting him. I think that to go to someone who has worked with you, who is in the documentary, and kind of be going in with the assumption that they will defend you was to me really fascinating and really telling.
Lack of awareness.
I'll just share with you quickly. I was at first like, oh, wow, he's changed. He's owning his behavior. He's apologizing. He knows he could have been better. And then the end, he says that he thinks there should be therapists on set. And I was like, yes. And then he goes, so that they can ask the kids and make sure that they really want to be there. And then I was kind of like, you know what? That's not cool. Fuck you. Because he's saying it's really on them. It's gaslighting, actually. It's on them to know that this is going to be tough and it's going to be a hard road and blah, blah, blah. And you have to really be clear that you want to do it. And maybe that's true, and they should have that conversation, but also therapy and like you said right at the beginning, they should have someone who's an advocate to be there on set and to keep an eye out for these dynamics and to know what these things look like and to be checking in with the kids privately so they have a safe space to go, yeah, I didn't like it when he put his arm around me or asked for a massage or whatever.
Ugh.
So
yeah,
he had me for a minute.
Yeah, and I know. And something else I would say is it was something where the directors reached out to Dan and he did not want to speak with the makers of the documentary about this. And when he kind of released his apology video, it was not with any journalist. It was kind of with one of his former actors, and it was released on his own YouTube channel, which to me, I think that if you want to engage in this in a way that is a little bit more willing to kind of answer hard questions, it would make more sense to speak with an actual journalist there.
These types of people aren't going to put themselves in situations where they can't curate it. And curate the conversation.
He's still got to hold the power. Like, think about it. If he's power hungry, he's got to hold the power. As parents and as people in this space trying to shine light and expose abuses of power, we are very grateful for this documentary. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you guys so much. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
You like what you hear? Please do give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. Every little bit helps us get this cult awareness content out there. Smash that subscribe button. You know what to do. So that was our interview with Kate Taylor and our conversation about Quiet on Set. We told you it would be intense. We also want to just touch a little bit further about what we mentioned on the topic of Drake Bell, one of the victims who later became a perpetrator. In 2021, he pledged guilty to child endangerment and a misdemeanor charge of disseminating matter harmful to juveniles. There's a longer conversation to be had here, perhaps about the choice to not go into that in great detail, and perhaps a conversation to be had about the child abuse cycles of victims who sometimes, but not always, also become perpetrators. We just wanted to acknowledge that because it's an important thing that we're not blind to, and sometimes hurt people, etc.
And that's why we need to disrupt the systems that make these kinds of abuses of power possible.
Anytime abuse overlaps with kids, it's extra infuriating. We're going to go for a nice long walk and do some affirmations, breath work, kick some rocks. Nickelodeon, just get it together. Hollywood, do better. Hashtag do better. Hashtag what the fuck.
When they protect their money, it's hard to. Hopefully, we'll be chatting with Kate Taylor soon over on Patreon, so don't forget to find us there. And remember, we're a cult-fighting content bargain now. All 4 of our bonuses every month are accessible for just $5 a month. And we keep it interesting over there with exclusive content, behind-the-scenes stuff, and you get to hear all new episodes early and, of course, ad-free.
Special thanks to Amanda Ambrose, who stepped in to help us write and research this episode today. Fun fact, she is Jess Tardy's first cousin. She also went to Harvard and also wanted to punch the TV screen and or ugly cry when she watched Quiet on Set. Amanda,
we do feel you.
We do.
Wrap it up here. Thanks for everyone for listening.
And for not joining a cult. Until next time.
Bye.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We're heading over to patreon.com/a-little-bit-culty now to discuss this episode. In the meantime, dear listener, please remember, this podcast is solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for real medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. For cult recovery resources and to learn more about seeking safely in this culty world, check out a-little-bit-culty.com/culty resources and don't miss Sarah's TED Talk called How Cult Literate Are You? Great stuff.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound and our co-creator and show chaplain/bodyguard, Jess Temple Tardy. And our theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant.
Growing your business can mean big-time logistical questions, like how are we going to keep up with all these local deliveries? Let Uber Direct offer you a helping hand. With Uber Direct, you take orders on your website, app, or by phone. Then drivers who are part of Uber's courier network pick them up from your store and deliver them to your customer's doorstep. Sounds simple, right? Uber Direct helps you give your customers what they want when they want it. Offer them delivery options in under 2 hours, on the same day, or scheduled up to 30 days in advance. Plus, share real-time tracking and ETAs by text. You can keep growing your business at a price that works for you. Never pay commission or hidden charges. Just pay a fixed fee per delivery. Delivery just got better with Uber Direct. Learn more at uberdirect.com.